Welcome to my Phasmid food plant guide. This guide will cover the most common food plants for stick and leaf insects within the UK. But please be aware this is not a guide if you come across a stick insect and want to know what to feed it. You're better off finding out what the species is first, or to look at the plant it's currently on or eating. I'm making this as it can be quite difficult to identify the many different food plants that Phasmids can eat. In fact, up until about a year ago, there was quite a lot of food plant in my garden and I didn't even realise. It's always good to provide insects with a variety of food. Of course, no matter the plant, you want to ensure that it's pesticide and pollution free. And if ever you offer a new food to your Phasmid, make sure it's not one of the toxic plants. And always make sure that they have the option to go back to their old food plant. For each of the food plants, I will be listing how common they are, when they can be found, their toxicity, and their palatability or tested preference, as well as an example of a species that will consume the food plant. I will also make note of any defining traits of the plant, to help with identification. Bramble is commonly used for a range of Phasmid species. It's a very common plant here in the UK, and can be found year-round. It is also non-toxic, and many Phasmids seem to really enjoy consuming it, making it a popular choice for many Phasmid keepers. There are several different types of bramble, although I don't think the insects have any real preference. Some of the distinguishing features of bramble are that it has thorns, and of course produces blackberries. Raspberries are also part of this genus. Bramble leaves are often made up of 5 individual leaflets. The closely related rose is also a popular species for Phasmids. Both wild and domestic rose can be used for these insects. Given their popularity, roses can be quite easy to find. But unlike bramble, they will drop their leaves in winter, which means you'll need to have another species available if you want to keep feeding your Phasmids over winter. Rose is non-toxic and is accepted by quite a few Phasmid species. Similar to bramble, roses also have thorns, but will produce rose hips and often have very fancy flowers, unlike bramble. Their leaves are often made up of 5 or 7 leaflets. Hazel is another fairly common plant. However, unlike the previous 2 species, it will often grow more as a tree. Hazel leaves cannot be found in the winter, making it a seasonal delicacy for Phasmids. As from my experience, they really seem to enjoy hazel. It is also non-toxic, but as always with deciduous plants, it's best to offer evergreen plants alongside them, just to make sure the Phasmid doesn't get too used to consuming a seasonal plant. Hazel leaves are fairly rounded, and of course the trees can occasionally produce hazelnuts. Oak is fairly common, but similar to hazel it grows more as a tree, and in most cases leaves cannot be found year-round. Oak is non-toxic and is enjoyed by quite a few Phasmids. These trees often grow very large and can produce acorns. Oak can often be easily identified by its leaf shape. There are types of evergreen oak, although I found these to be quite a bit rarer. I don't often use oak because I don't have good access to it. Firethorn is another evergreen plant that can be quite often found within gardens. It is a toxic plant and is not really enjoyed by many Phasmid species, with a few exceptions. Its leaves are glossy and oval-shaped. Firethorn, of course, also has thorns, and in winter often produces some very fiery coloured berries. Hawthorn is a fairly common plant used for hedging. However, when it's not maintained in a hedge, it can grow into a tree. It drops its leaves in the winter, making it a seasonal food source. And while it's non-toxic, I haven't found it to be a favourite of any Phasmid species I've kept. Hawthorn has fairly distinct leaves, and for part of the year will produce red berries. Again, as its name suggests, this plant can have thorns. Eucalyptus is a rather uncommon plant to find here in the UK. Given that it's native to Australia, it's only normally grown as an ornamental plant. It doesn't drop its leaves in the winter and therefore can be found year-round. It is a toxic plant, but I have no idea how preferable it is for Phasmids, as I've never personally used it, although supposedly many of the Australian species do quite enjoy it. There are many different species of eucalyptus, but from what I know, the species with longer leaves tend to be preferred. In my opinion, eucalyptus can sometimes look quite a bit like willow, but can be distinguished by its distinctive bark and more rigid, waxy leaves. Privet is another common plant used for hedging. It keeps its leaves year-round, but is apparently quite toxic. Personally, while I haven't yet used privet, there are certain species of Phasmid that rely on it very heavily. Privet has quite soft, oval-shaped glossy leaves, and will occasionally produce small black berries. Fern is a fairly uncommon plant. It can be found in woodlands or near damp areas, and is occasionally used as an ornamental plant in gardens. Some ferns die back completely in winter, while others stay year-round, and some are apparently toxic while others aren't. I have never tested fern, although it's apparently quite preferable for certain Phasmid species. Although from what I've heard, they often don't like the varieties kept as houseplants. Slough seems to be quite rare in the UK, as I've never seen one outside before. The only time I've seen it is when it was part of a bouquet of flowers. And while I was overjoyed to finally see it, I couldn't use it due to the pesticides that were probably on the plant. It does not drop its leaves in the winter, and is non-toxic. Apparently, many Phasmid species accept this plant, and it's very preferable. Unfortunately, my attempts to grow this plant from cuttings did not succeed, although I would quite like to grow and test this plant if I can ever find one. Its leaves are surprisingly rigid, and the plant will occasionally produce berries. Laurel is a fairly common hedging plant with leaves that can be found year-round. It is a toxic plant but is quite important for certain specialised phasmids. It has rigid, long, glossy leaves and will occasionally produce black berries. Hypericum is quite uncommon but can be found within gardens. It can be found year-round, although it does drop a few leaves in winter. It is a toxic plant that I have never personally tested. One of its most distinctive features are its yellow flowers and small, soft, pointed leaves. Ivy can be commonly found year-round. It is a toxic plant that I have never personally tested. It's commonly found climbing or trailing, and its leaves have fairly distinct points and veins. Of course there are other food plants that phasmids can eat as well, but these are often less common or not very well tested, and sometimes they're only accepted by a very rare species that aren't often kept in captivity. While this guide is mainly aimed at order Phasmatodea, I suppose it could also be used for Lepidoptera or Orthoptera. Basically caterpillars and grasshoppers, which includes locust. I do also recommend avoiding fresh new growth at the start of the season, especially for plants like bramble, as some keepers have reported this to be quite dangerous for phasmids. Also for young nymphs, especially of leaf insects, it's recommended to cut away the edges of leaves, as their mouthparts might not be strong enough to get through the outer edge of the leaf.